Hi everyone, this is one of my students' photos from the Lake District. So we've got a nice mountain scene with a few sheep. It's going to be quite nice. Going to go with some different trees in here, simplify it a bit. Okay, so I've drawn out the line of the hills. One line that's coming sloping up where we've got the trees at the bottom and a couple of houses. Always classic to see the white houses in the Lake District. I've then popped in this barbed wire fence at the bottom and a line here as to where the sort of ferny bits come. I have popped a couple of sheep in, but we'll probably lose them along the way, so you just want a rough idea of where all these trees are coming. Colours wise, so I've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, you want raw sienna. Then I've got cobalt blue with a touch of rose in, so that's just take the edge off the blue. Then a bit of that colour mixed with a bit of burnt sienna to make the grey. I've got burnt sienna on its own. I've got burnt sienna and Windsor blue or intense blue or phthalo blue, so that's to make that really dark green for the Scottish pines. And then Windsor blue and Gamboge yellow to make the grass green. So that's what I've got there so far. Okay, so we're going to come on, crack on with the sky. So you want plenty of water. Make sure that your round number 10 brush is nice and clean, because you're coming in first of all with the Naples yellow. And if you haven't got the Naples yellow, this will be the raw sienna. So I'm just going to bring that just along the top of the hillside, so we're getting that nice glow. Then I'm going to come into my cobalt blue and rose mix. Just coming with that circular motion. So because we've put that tiny touch of rose in, if it touches the yellow, we shouldn't go green. And you're going to come along and create this nice cloudy effect. All circular motion, pushing down the brush. Give that a little rinse, and I'm going to come into the grey, which was made with that cobalt blue mix and a little touch of burnt sienna. This is now that darker layer. Again, circular motion. Bring that through. Don't eliminate all of your blue. And you can tilt it a little bit and let it run a bit as well. It's got that feel of the sky, that it's in the sky, that it's going to rain, so we can let it rain a little bit, and that works really nicely. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so to simplify this, we're going to split this into several stages coming down. So this next one, I'm going to come to where the bottom of the trees are, up the hillside, to the bottom of the trees on this left hand side, up the hillside, over the top of the houses, so we're just doing the hillside this side. I'm going to start with a little bit of the Naples yellow to carry on bringing this through. Again, if you're using raw sienna, the raw sienna is fine. Try and get it where you've got the browner areas. Then your next colour you're going to come on with is your burnt sienna. And come quite carefully around the roofs of those houses. And then I'm going to pick up some of the lighter green. So this is the grass green, and I'm just going to start to bring some of that in. So we're not bothered about the trees at this stage. I'm more bothered about the definition of the hillside. It's just this area here where the trees come at the bottom that I'm wanting to get in and ready. So we've got some greener bits on this hillside, so we can pop those in. This lighter green. And then I'm going to swap down to a number 6. I'm going to pick up some of the sky grey. Just come in with that. And the beauty of any hillside like this is it works really nicely if you do get an odd watermark. I'm going to show you how to come in with a bit of a credit card to get some craggy areas in a minute. But my tip is to really simplify what you're seeing. Don't try and get bogged down with the detail. Follow the line of the land. So I'm focusing on the bits of shadow and little bits of pattern that I can see. But I'm not bothered about things like the hedges or the walls or an odd little tree. I'm not getting bogged down in that detail. And then I've got a touch of neat indigo on my palette. And I'm going to come into that and drop it where I can see the darkest areas. So that's going to really shoot those forward and give that sky a real glow behind. In fact, if you want to pick up an odd little bit more of the darker, it does tend to work quite well. But don't be afraid to pop this in, because it does really help with that glow in the sky. Then I'm again going to come into some burnt sienna, just bring this a bit stronger down this side, just to bring that bit forward a little bit. Then I've got a little bit of cut up credit card, and you can start to create some indentations. Again, following the line of the land, so that works quite nicely. You can also scrape. This is mainly quite that you want those darker bits in, but I will show you a little bit of scraping as well. So this is where you can get those walls or pathways in quite easily, just with an indent of the paper and the paint runs in. So here I've got like a sweep in, so I'm going to use the flat of the credit card and just sweep round so that I get that effect happening there. And there's a little bit of sweep in here, so I can again use the flat of the credit card. You don't want to pull too much of this dark away from the top, that's what you've got to be careful of. So you're just doing a few little bits. If when you scrape it doesn't move or run straight back, that's because it's too wet. You've got to get it at the right point for it to work. A few more indents in there. You can at that point as well go back in with a bit more colour if you want to. So I'm just going to take a bit more burnt sienna in there. I want that to really stand out. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off now. Okay, so at this bottom section now, where we've got all this sort of bracken and ferny bits, I'm going to take some colour on. I'm going to come in and sweep that on. I'm going to use the Naples yellow. If you're using raw sienna, you can use raw sienna. It's just because that's what I've used in the rest of the picture that I'm going to use this. Take that in. And then I'm going to drop in some burnt sienna. So I actually don't want to worry too much about what it looks like. I'm just getting the background colour in at this stage. And then I'm going to just dry this off really well. You can, if you want it to really shoot forward, add a touch of rose in places. That'll really help it shoot forward in the burnt sienna. A bit of brightness. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off as well. Okay, so you want nice clean water. You need to make sure this bit is nice and dry now. And what we're going to do is come over this hillside again. So this is a bit where we're going to pop our trees in. I'm going to come over a little bit of the sky. My advice is to do this in sections. So don't feel you've got to do the whole lot in one go. So I'm going to do these bigger trees first. And you're going to use a mixture of the greens and the burnt sienna. So I'm going to start with these littler trees behind. See, that's a bit wet. I've got a clean damp brush. That's just showing you that that's a little bit too wet, and I've missed a bit there. So I'm just going to give it a minute. In fact, I'll come along and wet the whole thing whilst I'm waiting, because there's trees all the way behind here. Some of these littler ones you'll get away with just putting in straight away. So I'm going to come over this side. This is the lighter green, it's just fairly thick. I missed a bit there. You're going for an impression of, I say this all the time, not exact. Don't eliminate all the hillside. Think about the scale of these trees. Missed a bit there as well. The light's so bad today, it's hard to see. Let's come back into these ones now. So these are the important ones really. So these are these fir trees. And you should get a really nice soft effect. The paint needs to be fairly thick. And with your number 6 brush you should be able to just easily come in. Right, this is the darker green now. Coming in with these Scotch pine trees. You can come over those other ones. Little one here. You can take a little bit of dark in at the bottom here. Where you've got the twiggier bits, you don't need to worry about those at this stage. We'll paint those dry after. Just have a little look if you want to put any darker bits in along here. You can use a little bit of the burnt sienna if there's any browner trees. If there's any bits that aren't quite wet enough, then just bring a little bit of water in above them. And you can also use a little bit of the sky grey. So if you want to indicate something else there or a bit of shadow, you can use a little bit of the sky grey in there. A little bit more of the green in that one. Just going to pop a little bit more water along the top of there. So I haven't got anything above these houses. And just pop in a little bit of the green along there as well. Okay, so something's happening here which is important. This line's showing in the sky. I'm going to show you how to rectify that later, so don't fiddle with it. Okay, so we're going to come into these little houses now. It's important we get them done before we come into the foreground, really. So I've got some grey on my brush. It's just the sky grey, and I'm going to come in, just paint onto dry and do the roofs. So this is just with my round number 6. Got the roof line here, and then a darker roof line there. Some of this is covered by the trees, so it's quite hard to see. So do your best to interpret it. I'm going to do a lighter roof this side. And then I've got some dark coming down this edge, just where there's a bit of shadow. And the same this side. So you can put a tiny chimney in there if you want. If you pick up a tiny bit of the indigo on the end of your brush, you can come along and just darken the tops of the roof. It's going to help that stand out a little bit more. I'm going to dry that off, and then we're going to come in and do a few windows. Okay, so with the indigo now, you're just going to do a few tiny dabs. Like so. That'll be enough. You can run a little bit more along the top of the roof. That's dry now, but it's just accentuating it. Try not to outline anything. It's that edge. A little bit of dark down there, and a little bit on the chimney there. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. So that's dried off, and on this foreground section I'm going to use some gum arabic. So I'm putting that straight onto the paper. You could mix it with the paint if you wanted to, and I'm going to bring it down over the colour we did earlier. And so I'm adding a bit of water in here. And up, mainly you want to be able to lift out the sheep and lift out some of the ferny bits. So that's the areas you really want the gum arabic to be. Then I'm coming in with my round number 10, and I'm going to sweep in this green. So I'm trying to follow the line of the land. If you want to at this stage, you can add a bit of yellow if you want to bold it up a little bit. Bits of burnt sienna will make it look more natural. And I want you to make sure you're coming over some of this front section. My plan is to lift some of that out. So you can whiz through it a little bit to start to create some bits of grasses. So this is a fairly big expanse you're covering. You're coming all the way up to the houses, so I know some of this is tree. You're going to pop in a bit of tree later. So just get the base colour on to start with. Sweep through. I've got a bit of Gamboge yellow on my palette, so I'm just going to sweep a little bit of that through. Just to give it a bit of variety, especially in this foreground section, because the brighter it is the better in that foreground. And then the same tip, you can go and make it a bit, so if I pick up a tiny bit of burnt sienna and just bring it through a little bit in this background section, that's going to mucky it up a bit and make it feel more distant. It's like a natural bit of shadow. If I pick up my round number 6, I can come in with the darker green and just create some of these little bits. So it's just a dabbing motion really. You don't want much water on the brush, you don't want it to expand too much. What they're doing is they're leading your eye in quite nicely here towards the houses, so it's quite useful. And then if you want any of the trees, you can come around the houses, just create those. You're doing an impression of, you don't really want it to look like a hedge that's coming round in a garden, so make it look more natural. If you want to overlap, you can overlap, so I can bring in a bigger tree here, maybe a bigger tree this side, just to frame them in a little bit. Just take a tiny bit of burnt sienna just in to give a bit of variety here. And then if you get your round number 10 and just wet your brush and just touch the top, that will just blend that through. You don't need a huge amount more in here. You could have a few little bits of burnt sienna to indicate some shadow coming through, a few little bits of the green. If you want any bits of shadow down here, that's quite useful on this edge where we're going to come in and do the twiggier trees in a bit. It's quite useful to have a little bit there. If this looks like it's flowing too much, just damp brush and just bring it through a little bit. You could even pick up a tiny touch of indigo and just line some of it off, just to stop it moving too much. I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so I'm just coming back now to this sky, and I've got a damp brush, so it's not soaking wet, with clean water, and I'm just agitating the surface where I've got this watermark. You can use your round number 10, you can use a soft bristled brush. It's really whatever you've got, and you're just going to agitate the surface and then dab a little bit. You won't eliminate it totally, but you will be able to make it look like it's part of the cloud formation. If you go too wet, you'll lift too much, so just make sure it's just a damp brush, and that will just bring that in nicely. You can always go further and make more of a cloud formation. sometimes you just have to do that and it just works. So that's eliminated that bit now. So my plan was to say, right, there's some sheep here now, and if I come on with a wet brush and just create some blobby shapes. So there's quite a lot of water on this brush now. These should appear as little sheep. So if I dab them off, so these are just random shapes, they will appear as little sheep. I'm going to do a few little more over here. So you want them littler if they're further in the distance. I've gained an extra sheep there because I've dropped a bit of water. So that's just the way that the gum arabic works, to be able to lift. And then what I'm going to do is come through and paint in some ferny bits here. And in the same way as it's lifted on there, it should lift and reveal the burnt sienna. And it'll be much more fluid and nicer than the masking fluid would have been. Just get a bit of a kitchen towel to dab this off. You can see them just appearing. And they'll be much more fluid and random. I'll just pop a few more in. And just work through this and keep creating. If you try and work to where the colour is, then you'll know that that's going to work quite well to lift, and you'll have that burnt sienna underneath. We can add a few more burnt sienna ones over the top as well. This just gives us a nice base. Okay. I'll dry that off and we'll come in and do the trees. Okay, so I've got some sepia on my palette now. I've twisted upside down and I'm just coming in with a rigger or line writer. Sepia's got a little bit of water in. I'm just starting to create these branches this side. So we're getting this sort of twiggy effect coming in now. And this is one of those ones where you can spend as much time as you want, as little, and just do it quite quickly, or you can come in and really create a really nice detail of the tree here. It's entirely up to you. It's in a nice position for it to hold quite a lot of detail if you want that. Just make sure you're coming off, tapering those branches and getting them finer and finer. at the bottoms, if you just touch in a little bit and it'll just blend. You've got quite a light sort of twiggy tree here, so you can make the colour a little bit lighter if you want, or you can go in with a darker colour. This is coming over. Front section. There's a little tree over here. Be very careful on scale. Don't go mad. You don't want to draw too much attention really to that. And there's a few little bits this side as well. It's really just entirely how much you want to do at this stage. I always say less is more. If I keep upside down, I'm going to dip into the indigo. I haven't really cleaned my brush. And I'm going to put the dark bits on these sheep. Now you may say, why are you doing that? Why don't you just turn it round? Because it doesn't matter, because I'm not painting a sheep, I'm painting a shape that's going to look a little bit like a sheep. So I don't really need to see that it's a sheep. Just dotting on what I can see. Which in most cases is not a lot. And if I twizzle that back round, they're going to look like sheep from a distance. If you get a brush with a tiny bit more of your grass green on and come underneath each of those sheep, we'll just give them a little bit of shadow and a little bit of grounding, so that they feel like they're part of the landscape. And then I'm going to come into some burnt sienna last of all, and just come through. If you want it to be a bit brighter, this is a new burnt sienna and it doesn't seem quite as strong as the old version. Just add a touch of rose and that'll just make it a bit warmer and brighter, and you can just come through and add a little bit more to this front section. So this is just still with my rigger. Just add in little bits. And just a few sweeps here and there. You can just dot and wiggle through as well. That'll give him that little bit more of a ferny quality. Just a few wiggles and dots. And that's pretty much it. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week.